Welcome back, Evolvers, to Evolve with Amelia. Eve, for those who think deeply about life, who want to understand the deeper components that are holding back change, and for people who aspire in every single day actions to actually implement the change that they wish to be in the world. So, for today's episode, we are going to uncover not just why we're struggling to change, as we mentioned and ended in our last episode. We are starting where we are, and most importantly, understanding why change feels so hard. Because if you've ever started trying to grow in a specific direction, be it career, intimate relationship, or somewhere else throughout your life, and you have this sense of something keeps pulling me back, you've listened to the last episode and you've acknowledged how shame is a part of this process and how our nervous systems are holding some of that shame and pulling us back. What I want to uncover with you in today's episode is the primary belief systems that I see again and again after working with thousands of people. And these are the beliefs that end up running our life and how you can evolve them before the seasons, the tides of change, that time frame collapses on you. So I want to show you why this happens. We talked in our last episode about starting where you are. So hopefully by now you have looked at the growth journey, also referred to as the evolve journey. You've put a pin on where you are in the map. And most importantly, you've started to develop an awareness as to why compassion is the antidote to shame. And it's not just compassion alone that is going to help us uproot what keeps pulling us back. So today, I want to make sure that we all have what on the surface feels like, quote unquote, might be working, but underneath what that insidious, oftentimes overlooked aspect, which is where our core beliefs come in. And this becomes a system where our belief systems shape everything we think, feel, and do. And so there's 3 different types of core beliefs. And for the purposes of this episode, we'll focus on 1. Core beliefs are essentially the thought patterns that you continuously think that shape how you move through life. You can have core beliefs about yourself, core beliefs about other people, and core beliefs about the world at large. We're going to focus on that first one because when it comes to the core beliefs about ourselves, what I find time and time again is that people who go through experiences, adversities, challenges, there's a system, there's roots of these moments that end up wrapping around what we think about ourselves. And that wraparound isn't always for the best of us. So when we go through life, I'm going to add to the share screen, and you should see what is a signature framework I call the roots of shame. When you go through life and you experience life, there are moments, oftentimes, as I mentioned in my last episode, before we are verbal, we develop these ways of thinking about ourselves that are not helpful and ultimately hurt us. And these beliefs about ourselves end up sticking with us for a lot of our life. And individuals who experience adversity really young often experience that adversity through the way in which they can. In which they can is through by making meaning out of the situation. So let's say, for example, you grew up in a household, you were one of many children, and you experience a little bit of that emotional neglect in your household, which, to be real, it's quite common. The lies that children learn about themselves, otherwise known as the limiting beliefs that they have about themselves and how they've been impacted by the world, changes the way in which they see themselves forever and the world around them. But these are the lies that people develop from a young age. And these are the lies that strangle our ability to grow. Why? Because our growth is either fueled or inhibited by the belief systems about ourselves, others, and the world around us. So today, let's look at these belief systems. These beliefs did not come from nowhere. They were learned. They were programmed. sometimes they were designed into your system. So the first one that often becomes the inhibitor to why people don't change is that when something happens to them, they end up being forced to believe that whatever happened to them, that adversity, it was their fault. And so they're the ones that are to blame for whatever happened to them. So let's say, for example, that emotional neglect that you might have felt growing up, it was your fault because obviously the reason being is that you're a bad child, you're a bad daughter, you're a bad son, you're a bad whatever, you're unworthy of good things, you're unworthy of attention, you're unworthy of insert whatever narrative. And ultimately, that forms this belief that you're unlovable and unworthy and bad at the core of who you are. And that binds with this other belief that you inherently are shameful. Not maybe something that you did that didn't reckon that level of emotional attention that you needed as a child, but that you at the core are shameful. So remember when we talked about shame and how that impacts our core identity? Now we're understanding where that's coming from and what the roots were. And then on top of that, the core belief about ourselves that prevents change from happening, even when we want to change, and maybe even when we do start to showcase self-compassion, that distal compassion that we talked about in our last episode. Well, it doesn't matter. Why? Because there's a belief that's literally encompassing and becomes the glass ceiling of our own capabilities. And this big sense of powerlessness to change comes in. So we don't believe that we have power to change. And this is where victim mindsets come in. More often than not, we end up developing this narrative about ourselves that we are powerless, even if we want to change. So that nervous system that we spoke about in our last episode, you're working with belief systems that are not even going to encourage you to change, even if you want to. Why? Because this sense of pervasive powerlessness happens. And then the last limiting belief that I see, in addition to all of these, is even if you were to change and you were to maybe talk about what was holding you back or share that, let's say, for example, you were emotionally neglected and that's really resulted in some of the patterns that you're noticing today as an adult. Well, it doesn't matter because there's this inner voice that's saying, well, no one's going to believe you. If you were to kind of share what happened to you, to process maybe that trauma, that adversity, that suffering. And because there's this internal gaslighting happening, there's this power bunking, this sense of powerlessness, and it's pervasive. All of these elements combined, again, these beliefs did not come from just anywhere. They were learned. And so we all learn that the shame that we're experiencing at an unconscious level, again, often before we are verbal, we learn that whatever happened to us, it was our fault. That as a result, we are unworthy or unlovable or bad at the core. In addition to that, we are shameful. And that shame is deserved. And if we were to think about our sense of power and control, our own sense of self, we are actually powerless. And if we were to even try to change or become powerful in any regard, even in our own agency of change, well, no one would believe you and it wouldn't even be worth it. So ultimately, it comes down to this big sense of pervasive powerlessness. And usually there's one belief that, like a sense of powerlessness, that holds everything together. And it's not because it's true, but it's because what kept you safe in moments when you were young, maybe even before you were verbal, you developed these limiting beliefs about yourself. And so most people try to change by fighting this, when instead, what I suggest in this episode is doing something different, because the system is going to resist you. Your nervous system is going to resist if you try to just rip this out. And at the end of the day, the reason being is because your system believes that it, at its core fundamental level, is protecting you. So instead of trying to rip this out, what do? We do something different. Now, hopefully you can see, it's here. We do something different. And what that different is, it's not ripping out these core beliefs about ourselves. It's instead acknowledging that it's time to introduce something new. It's time to connect us with our sense of power. with our sense of worthiness, with our sense of goodness, and in our ability to learn to change. This is where the growth mindset comes in. And over time, as we introduce something that's new, by introducing something that's new, the system reorganizes. Our nervous system repatterns. Our nervous system relearns. That which has been learned and patterned can also be unlearned and repattern. That's the beauty of neuroplasticity. And this is where I think things get really exciting. Because at the core of all of this, what is happening is that these old beliefs, they don't just disappear, although that would be fabulous. We could just rip them up and chuck them out. The reality is quite often that they slowly, and with nurturance and this word called stewardship, stewarding our sense of self, our sense of power, our sense of capability, our sense of enoughness, our sense of capacity to change. These old beliefs, they don't disappear. They just stop running everything. And so what I think is exciting about this is that you don't have to become someone entirely new when you go about this change. You simply need enough safety to reorganize what is already there. And that's why I love these visuals so much, because it really does help us understand very much are we able to learn and grow and let that growth process, that growth journey, become a testament to truly how capable we are. So when we do this, over time, we replace our limiting beliefs with empowering beliefs. Like, I am powerful. I am worthy of care. I am capable. I am lovable. And when that becomes truly the beliefs that you're planting seeds. So these are the thoughts that you're thinking every single day, the decisions that you're making, the thoughts that you're choosing to nurture and focus on, as opposed to those that you cancel out and say, hey, wait over there. I'm capable, I'm worthy of care, and I'm powerful, reconnecting you to your sense of power. What happens is that your system reorganizes, it celebrates the growth, and then you can pull these limiting beliefs out. But it makes sense when you see it. It's not easy in practice. And I think that that's where, as your growth friend, I got to tell you that it's practice over time with repetition, plus that compassion that we spoke about in our last episode, that helps us understand this is why some of the advice that we might get surface level just doesn't work. Because safety at a nervous system level requires nurturance, consistency, repeatability, dependability, stewardship, and care. This is an adaptive approach instead of just yanking out those belief systems. I wish I could tell you that's easy to do and that that's possible and that it's possible for you. But the truth is that change happens over time through repeatable, consistent, dependable actions from you to you. And so hopefully today, though short, it's powerful. We understand that these beliefs that we have about ourselves, they didn't form because something was wrong with you, or you're not getting that change that you wish to see, or becoming that person that you wish to become because you're incapable of that, although your limiting belief that was formerly placed might tell you otherwise. But these limiting beliefs, they developed and they formed and they integrated into your nervous system because of something that happened to you. So together, as we understand ourselves, the world around us, but most importantly, our internal systems that are for change or protecting us against change, it is my hope, my intention that today you can plant one seed of hope for your nervous system. So my invitation for all of us evolvers in today's episode is for you to choose one of the beliefs that you saw on the screen here. And I encourage you to begin to plant that in your nervous system. I encourage you to begin to water that, to nurture it, to think about it more than your limiting beliefs might ask for you to think about them. And if you want softer reflections, as always, for today's episode for practical, tactical application, that is where in the reflection zone in the show note, you can click and become a part of that softer community that allows some of this to really sink in at the core. So I hope this was powerful for you. Small, mighty applications of this. And I hope you take my invitation to plant one seed of hope for you. Keep evolving, everyone. Thanks for joining today.